We are joined with the man himself, Ian Proud. Ian Proud. He is a former British diplomat that was a member of the British Diplomatic Service from 1999 to 2023. From that time, he worked in Thailand, Afghanistan, and was an economic counselor in Moscow from 2014 to 2019. Now, this was the basis of a book that he wrote on his experiences in Moscow. It was called A Misfit in Moscow, How British Diplomacy in Russia Failed. Ian, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Jamal. How are you doing? Nice to meet you for the first time.
I know, right? I am very happy to meet you. I have so many questions, especially since you've been on the inside of this blob of whatever they want to call it. So I'm very curious on your take on this stuff. What did it mean to be a British diplomat in Moscow? Like, what was the job function? What was the responsibilities?
Gosh, I had so many responsibilities, Jamal, to be honest. But my main responsibility was to sanction Russia, essentially. That's not the job I necessarily signed up to. The photograph of me in the background is with the former Prime Minister David Cameron after the G8 summit that Vladimir Putin attended. At that time, UK-Russia relations were in a better state. Obviously, that changed in February 2014 with events that we all know and understand about, with the coup in Kiev and everything that happened after that with sanctions. But sanctions became my sort of main function. And as you can imagine, in the context of the Ukraine crisis, living in Moscow as a British diplomat was quite tense from a work perspective. But actually, from a life perspective, it was a great place. I had family, very young children there at the time. And as a place to have family, it might seem odd, but it's actually a remarkably nice place to live.
I can imagine. I mean, it's a beautiful country, from my understanding. Everybody that is gone is giving me compliments. I'm sorry, I have a cold, so I'm a bit stuffy. Yeah, I was super curious about what your role was there in that context as a diplomat. So thank you for that. I want to show you a few pictures, and I want to get your take on this. So you have, this is Merz, German Chancellor, presiding over mass layoffs, 250,000. This is according to Reuters. If you go to another one, you have Germany falls back into recessionary territory for a second quarter. GDP revised down. If you go to another one, there's so many of these. You have Volkswagen that fell by 36% in that quarter, or in the last quarter. Merz came out and said we have structural economic crisis that they're effectively trying to deal with. We have two more. This one goes into about 17,000 jobs were cut. Mechanical engineering, more than 12,000 metallurgy. Chemical pharmaceutical industries were pretty much untouched. Overall, the number of jobs in the German industry decreased by about 114,000, 2.1% over the year. If we move over to the UK, well, and there's also the hilariousness of this one. Germany coming out saying, we can't afford our welfare system. You people need to accept less. You all need to accept less. And this one, Britain no longer a rich country after living standards plunge. Parts of the UK are now worse than the poorest regions in Slovenia and Lithuania. I show those because I have a hard time believing that the other parts of Europe are faring that much better in this case. And yet, they are adamant about giving $100 billion, potentially that's what Zelensky wants, to Ukraine. And to make it even worse, the U.S. is openly bragging that we're getting a 10% markup on every weapon that Europe buys. But hey, if they're going to play it, we're going to fleece them for it. How does this work? Like, meaning, what is the average person? And maybe that's the wrong question. Let's go with this question first. Why are they so invested? Were they willing to effectively burn down their own economies in order to continue a war that is obviously lost?
Well, because admitting that it's lost amounts to an absolute massive failure of policy and imagination on their part. They've invested heavily since 2014 in pushing the agenda of NATO enlargement through Ukraine. Putin has consistently made it clear that that was a clear red line. You know, for him, we've sanctioned Russia to the hilt, hoping that would make a difference. It hasn't made any difference. And given all the signs suggesting this would happen, we nevertheless pushed Ukraine into a war that it is losing at great expense, at a cost of $40 billion every single year since the war started,
Wow.
to European taxpayers. Ukraine's military takes up 67% of its government spending. That's 37% of GDP. Think about that, 37% of GDP on defense spending. That's 10 times more as a percentage of GDP than the US. Obviously, the US is the biggest kind of global spender, massive amounts of money. But the Europeans say, well, let's keep going. I mean, the Germans, you showed those photographs of Merz, massive economic challenges facing his country. He wants to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, not by 2035, but by 2029, which is, that's 100 billion euros a year, of government spending. Well, God help any sort of a disabled person or personal benefits in Germany.
What are they thinking? Like, I'm fascinated by this question of what are Europeans thinking when they see this? They see all of these European leaders coming to the White House, humiliated by Trump. I mean, he's taken opportunities to humiliate them individually. The tariff deal was a complete capitulation. And he has all of them sitting at his desk where he's using these photo ops to show dominance that he's effectively exerting over the European leaders. The markup, 10% on weapons. And the US is bragging, we're not paying for anything. Europe is paying for it all. Europe is paying for it all. And you still get European leaders saying, we are going to put troops in Ukraine after the peace deal. Basically, we're going to feed Europeans to the Russians. What are people, just regular, random people, looking at a newspaper, looking at news, maybe on independent media? What are they thinking at this point?
Well, most people who read traditional media, mainstream media, will get a blizzard of state propaganda that we're winning, and if we just apply a bit more pressure and just give a bit more money to Ukraine, then eventually it will do the job. But it's kind of sensible people like you and alternative media sources who are actually exerting real curiosity and asking important questions about actually, why is this the right way to go? And very clearly it isn't. I think ordinary people, I mean, I come from people assume that I was some sort of toffee-nosed person because I was a British diplomat, but I come from a very working class background, and ordinary people I speak to are genuinely curious. They want to find out. They want kind of real information because they can't get that from mainstream media, and they need it.
Yeah, because this is disastrous. The European leaders really serious about putting troops in Ukraine. I mean, it is from the Russian position, those troops will be targeted immediately because they have to be targeted immediately. Europe has to know that, meaning their nose in a camel's tent. The moment that you put 5,000 in, you basically have 100,000 in. So is Europe serious about sacrificing X number of thousand of their people for unclear ends? And I don't think the ends are all that unclear. But are they serious about this notion of putting troops in Europe or putting troops in Ukraine?
Well, I don't think they have the capabilities to do so. Russia apparently has 600,000 troops in Ukraine right now. The British Army is 73,000 people in total. That's all the cooks, all the people who drive the trucks, and a few people who actually shoot the guns. So, we just don't have the number of troops to put on the ground, even if we wanted to. Germany has the biggest army, but it's still much smaller. The biggest army in European NATO is Turkey, and they don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
In this, we just don't have the troops, even if we wanted them. Our camel, Jamal, I'm afraid, is actually much smaller than people realize.
That's a rational argument. That's a rational argument. Western exceptionalism is not rational. Like, contrary to all belief, they believe seemingly that we are better, we're morally superior, and we need to keep this war going because we need to keep this war going, despite every evidence to the contrary that Ukraine is busted. You can see that there's articles out today that Kupiansk, Russia's made advances. Kupiansk, I think it's called Serbiansk, the farce, that Ukraine is effectively in a panic. Kramatorsk, Slamiansk is getting flanked. It's obvious that this is reaching a crisis point. And Europe keeps pushing. I mean, like, I want to get to Trump in a moment, but just from the European side of it, I guess what I'm asking is, they are pushing knowing full well that Ukraine is going to collapse at some point. They're not going to stop. But the Europeans don't seem to have a notion of stopping. It seems like they're more willing, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, to push this war to the point where Russia is forced to take all of Ukraine with the idea that they can have this kind of guerrilla war after the fact, meaning we can tie Russia up for a decade by making them choke on all of Ukraine. So no, we don't want to deal. We understand what's taking place on the ground, and we accept what's taking place on the ground. We would have preferred Ukraine to win, but they didn't. And so the next best option is for every last man, woman, child, elderly person, handicapped person, etc., that they put on the front line in a press gang to die, and Ukraine to fall, and Russia to have to, I don't know, mobilize 2 million men to somehow occupy all of Ukraine. Is that too cynical? I mean, because otherwise I don't understand this continuous push for a losing thing.
Well, I wish I could say that Europeans had any clarity of thought on it. One of the big drawbacks of the European architecture, if you like, is collective decision making. You know, you've got these 27 countries plus the UK trying to decide something, and they just can't decide in a quick enough way. I liken it to a game of chess with 28 people playing against one person, Vladimir Putin, and talking about each of their moves for weeks ahead of the move, and then deciding to do something less advantageous. You know, you just can't win a war by committee. I think that's the truth of it. In terms of Russia's aspirations, I think certainly Russia would happily keep going for another year and take the whole of Donetsk, which I think looks very achievable militarily. I'm sad to say, you know, from where we're sitting today, progress is very slow, but I think 1 year could, you know, enable them to kind of do the job in terms of Donetsk. I've never really seen that Russia wants to take the whole of the Ukraine. They'd be absolutely not in their interests. But the big question, going right to the top, you know, that you helpfully pointed out, Jamal, is who's going to pay for this anyway? I mean, is Europe really going to pay 40 billion at least every year to, you know, fund an army that Ukraine is losing? It's very obviously madness, but people refuse to face up to the facts because they know their political skin is going to be hung out to dry. You know, when this comes home, it's far better to settle now and then deal with the political consequences after, because, you know, you see reform rising in the UK, you know, AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen's party in France, and so on. The mainstream parties, you know, could be completely destroyed if they carry on this route.
But they are carrying on.
They are.
Like, meaning what you're saying is absolutely true. The AfD surging, national rally surging. I would tell you, though, a lot of people don't believe Europe is a democracy. Like, if you look at what happened to Romania, they effectively got rid of, what is it, Karlin Gorgescu, and something that seemed very shady. And even getting rid of Marie Le Pen, it seemed very shady. And it seemed like all of it was done in order to undermine candidates who would be more skeptical of the conflict. I've even heard German analysts say, hey, we have tools that can prevent the AfD from coming to power also. They put the AfD under police security, not security, skepticism. Yeah. So that's what I mean, right? Like, it seems that there is, I understand that this is war by committee, but it seems like everybody in the committee, with the exception of Hungary and Slovenia or Slovakia, want a different, are on the same page. And that same page is sanctions. Merch just came out and said, we passed 19 sanctions, or 18, but the 19th is going to cripple Russia. It's like, okay, dude, you're being a comedian right now. I'm saying Europe seems to be fundamentally on the same page. And the fact that there are, let's say, opposition parties in major countries that want something different don't seem to be changing their point of view or opinion. They seem to be going down this road. I guess I'm asking, are they going down this road? Because the thought is, meaning this is not basic politics or domestic politics. This is international politics in a sense of geopolitical.
Yeah, it is
war. Yeah, we need to cripple Russia. We can't do it this path, so we do the other path.
Yeah, I mean, I think the need to cripple Russia has always been an underlying sort of driver, even if it hasn't always been stated. But in terms of the anti-democratic thing, I completely agree with you, Jamal. I think one of the consequences of war has been the ever centralization of power into an unelected elite in Brussels through the European Union institutions. They've gathered political and military power, you know, upon themselves at the expense of member states, and that's actually why countries like Hungary now and Slovakia are speaking out, because they see their power being eroded. They see themselves being sucked into a war that they don't want to have any part of. You see Peter Szijjarto, the foreign minister of Hungary, whenever he tweets, he says, we don't want to be pulled into a war that we don't want to have any part of. But actually, these centralizing sort of tendencies of the Commission under Ursula von der Leyen, with this completely, frankly, crazy foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas, in charge, are just kind of centralizing, which is making all of Europe less democratic, including the UK. And when you have a mainstream media that constantly pushes state propaganda, well, that is also anti-democratic, because people aren't getting real insight, real truth, and real thought and conversation about different approaches to this terrible war that Ukraine is losing.
Give me your take on this. Was that the actual point of the European Union, though? I mean, I know it started as this kind of trade cartel, but the thought of, I remember Angela Merkel, ever closer, this idea of we're going to create a currency. Once we create the currency, it's going to force us to get closer and closer and closer. Was that the ultimate point anyway?
For many people, it has been for a long time, ever closer union, because bureaucracies by their nature, they need power, to fuel themselves, and power for them is more powers, ever greater kind of union, greater political control over the decision making of states, but of course, the European Union isn't like the United States of America, where you have a very clearly laid out federal system. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's better than the system we have here. You have 27 countries that have radically different cultures, from each other, different political systems, different economic, systems. Countries want to make their own choices. They don't want to be governed by invisible elites, in Brussels, and that's what makes the European project so much different. But why it worked before this drive for ever closer union is because it focused principally on the economic, social, and cultural side, breaking down barriers between states, allowing people to move freely, work freely, set up businesses, trade, invest, and all that sort of thing. All very beneficial. European kids going to universities in different countries, learning languages. All of this is fantastic stuff, right? You want people to understand people of difference, however that difference is defined. Race, religion, color, sexuality, whatever it may be. Understanding people of difference was always core to the kind of European project. But once you try to create some sort of homogenous political whole out of radically different cultural and political systems in different countries of different sizes and different strengths, it's never going to work.
Yeah, good point. I'm curious on something else. I want to go to Moscow for a bit. Since you were there, I would imagine you've soaked in the culture and the thinking, and you've analyzed the stuff constantly. Your Substack page is fantastic. I advise people to check the Substack out. You write articles on these topics all the time. What are they thinking? And the reason why I'm asking this, they're having a meeting with Trump. The meeting goes well. Donald Trump immediately flips on the dime and takes on the Russian position of, we need a settlement, not a ceasefire, a settlement. I need them to fight. We need a settlement. This freaks out Europe. And they're like, we must talk to Trump immediately, thinking that the last person in the room is going to somehow change Donald Trump's point of view. They rush to the United States. Trump, according to the Financial Times, comes out right here. The U.S. told the Europeans it would help the coalition of the willing, quote unquote, in Ukraine, but the agreement can still be canceled. Quote, American officials told the European counterparts that Washington is ready to provide strategic enabling capabilities, quote unquote, whatever that means, including intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, command and control assets, as well as air defense systems to support any Ukrainian ground-led deployment. The U.S. offer depends on commitments from European capitals to deploy tens of thousands of troops if Ukraine, and according to officials, the agreement can still be canceled. So the U.S. is throwing out this bone of, hey, we'll provide air cover, we'll provide strategic data and information. We'll have your back if you go into Ukraine. What is Russia thinking at this point? That has always been a red line. Trump and the U.S. has to know it, and maybe they don't. But if you're Moscow, what is your appraisal?
If you're in Moscow, you're probably wondering what on earth they're thinking about, quite frankly. But the important thing is there going to be a peace deal, right? That's what people want more than anything else. A ceasefire just kicks down the road some very, very troublesome issues around a peace deal, including on obviously the disposition of territories, when the fighting stops. But for Russia, what's happening with sanctions? If there's a peace deal, Russia will want some certainty that there's a process for them to have sanctions relief over a period of time as certain milestones are met. When you just have a ceasefire, that kicks that can down the road. And in circumstances where Russia is winning on the battlefield, why would they agree to that? They want real commitments. NATO, Trump's been clear on that. That's a very, very helpful step on his part. The territorial issue is very, very problematic. Sanctions as well. But, the Russians have said they never, this whole war was fought to stop NATO expanding into Ukraine.
Exactly.
Why we would think that actually, even after a peace deal that was acceptable to both sides, Russia would then think it's acceptable to station troops, within Ukraine is frankly, difficult to make sense of, not least because Ukraine has the biggest army in Europe now, not including Russia, of course, has almost 1 million personnel. I mean, that's, their army is bigger than the British army, the German army, the French army combined by about 3 times, actually. So why would they need our troops anyway? If they have a 1 million men and women, under arms, it's quite bizarre. It's the need to kind of do something helpful, which in fact is deeply unhelpful and just delays the point at which peace will break out.
Wait, just to be clear, you're saying you believe Ukraine is 1 million or 1 billion? I think you're
million. Sorry, million. Did I say billion? No, million.
Yeah. Is that true though? I mean, like all the reports that have been coming out, the 1.7 million dead that was leaked at one point. Let's say it's not 1.7, even 1.5. I used to go with 1.3, and 1.3 is still an astonishing number of people to be killed. 400,000 people, that's according to Ukraine itself, have effectively deserted. They have manpower shortages on the entirety of the front. That's why there's the breakthroughs that are taking place today. It doesn't seem like they got 1 million men left to fight that war, unless you mean conscripting kids and elderly.
Well, from the moment the war started, martial law was imposed and adult males were not allowed to leave the country. Now, okay, right. Some of them have smuggled their way across the country. Some of them have paid bribes to leave the country, and some of them have paid bribes not to be beaten up in the streets and mobilized if they have enough money. But all of the kind of fighting age men, and some will have frankly reached fighting age since the war started, it's been going on so long, have not been able to leave the country. So they have a big pool, and if men don't want to fight, as you alluded earlier, they just get dragged off the streets, in front of their families, beaten, loaded into buses and taken to the front line, whether they like it or not. So yes, even if they've lost 1.7 to death and injury, by the way, I mean, some of them could still be recycled back into military service. I do believe they have approaching 1 million men. I mean, there's a huge front, across the battle line. Ukraine has actually defended it incredibly well, has to be said. I mean, all credit to them. Russian progress has been very slow. So, I mean, they're defending that with something, and that's very large numbers of troops that we, actually no, Europe, less so America, but we are paying for.
Have you seen those videos? Oh, those videos are so bad. It's like a guy's walking his dog, truck comes up, grabs the guy, snatches him in, kicks the dog.
Yeah.
Or the pizza delivery driver. There are horrendous videos.
Can you imagine that happening in the USA? Where do you live, actually, Jamal?
I am in Malaysia as we speak. I'm sorry, I'm in Indonesia as we speak. But I usually live in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah, I like Virginia very much, and also like Indonesia very much as well, actually. Been there many times. But actually, can you imagine that happening in Richmond, Virginia? Somebody dragging college kids off. I can't imagine it in the UK. There'd be public uproar about it. It'd be all over the newspapers. You never hear anything about this in British mainstream media, and I suspect not in US mainstream media either. And yet the videos, as you say, are utterly horrendous.
They bury these videos in the UK. I mean, no, I don't see. I haven't been in the States in a while, but yeah, when I was there, I haven't seen these videos. People typically see them on social media. Yeah, I mean, you see people fighting tooth and nail, believing that this is a death sentence if you effectively take me to the front lines.
Yeah. I asked Grok to write a report on busification, just out of interest, and it sent me something back about the renovation of old buses. So even even Grok on X was censoring. This it's updated it now, but and then it said Buddhification, so people taking up Buddhism at one point as well. So I mean, even
that's great.
X is better now, but yeah, it's amazing the kind of complete suffocation of any open information about Bussification is a terrible, terrible thing and shouldn't be allowed to happen. We wouldn't allow that to happen in our countries.
Do you think Trump is serious about peace?
I do, actually. I do. But I think he's hemmed in. I think he's hemmed in by the blob, his own blob. He's hemmed in by our blobs, and we have lots of blobs. And he just, I think he wants to cut a deal with Putin. I think he actually wants to cut a deal that saves lives in Ukraine, but he just can't make all these restive parts kind of come together. It's the big irony, Jamal, of this is that actually, this war started because, the Americans under Biden were pushing it with the Europeans kind of reluctant partners. But now that's flipped. That's the Europeans who want to keep fighting, and the Americans are saying, well, actually, no, shouldn't we stop? I mean, it's quite a bizarre reversal that we've seen happening. I can't quite get my head around it.
But Trump could always walk. And the reason that the Europeans, if you remember, after the meeting with Putin, the Europeans were very angry. They were hostile. Oh, we're not going to accept this. They brought in Zelensky, rubbed his head, said, it's okay, it's okay. Daddy is treating you poorly. We're going to go see Daddy together because we don't want Daddy to abuse you like he did last time. Zelensky put on a suit. Apparently, J.D. Vance said, you need to, if you calm down, I won't say anything. And so you had to mute it, Zelensky. Anger that was there, muted into very calm beseeching of Daddy to please, daddies, don't leave us. Don't go to this other woman. And in that very specific case, meaning they know in their heart of hearts that Trump could always walk. And so they're not going after him in a particular way because they don't necessarily want him to say, I'm done, hands up, I'm walking out the door. Why doesn't Trump walks if the U.S. pulls out all of the stops? Meaning, and I guess I'm asking this question, just to be clear. I'm asking this question because if Trump is serious, the nets is out. This other stuff is not.
Well, he's not walking because the Americans are making lots of money, and he's even said so himself. NATO is paying for the weapons, and that's not the US bit of NATO. That's the other bit of NATO. Actually, the only 1/3 of NATO, because bear in mind that the United States of America effectively makes up 2/3 of NATO. All these Europeans are kind of paying for the war, so it's no longer his problem, and American companies are benefiting. So, I mean, I think he would like to see a way out, but he's not able to break the deadlock in Europe, and ultimately he can see a profit in it as well. So the businessman in him is saying, well, okay, well, this is not the route that I would prefer, but okay, if we're making money, so why not? That's the kind of cynical way in which I tend to view it.
Yeah, but that means he doesn't want to stop the war. Meaning you can't have it both ways.
He doesn't want enough. He doesn't want it enough, because I think he could. I think he could seriously put the Europeans. I mean, he put the Europeans under pressure to kind of agree to 5% defense spending. Exactly. Why can't he put them under sufficient pressure to kind of fall in line, Daddy? Daddy's talking over ending the war. He can't do it. So I think he doesn't want it enough.
So you think he wants it, but he wants it under certain terms.
Yeah, and and he has other big priorities. I mean, I think China's a bigger deal for him. He's got, I mean, like any president or prime minister or whatever, he's got domestic things to think about as well. The U.S. economy in the context of his tariff wars and that sort of thing. So it's just not really in the America's ballpark, and it just doesn't matter as much as it's not as salient as, frankly, China. And never will be, and never should have been in the first place.
I know, but that also means that the U.S. can't pivot to China because the U.S. is still invested in Ukraine.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, it depends. And it also depends what you mean by pivot. Sorry,
you disagree? So, meaning from going all the way back to Obama, the U.S. has wanted to have this "quote unquote" Asian pivot.
Yeah.
They tried it with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trump has tried to get Australia, South Korea, Japan, all of these countries online for a potential "quote unquote" war.
Yeah.
And the U.S. has wanted to extract itself, supposedly, according to Trump, out of Europe, let Europe deal with the Russians, give Israel to deal with Iran, with the U.S. dealing with China using its proxies in the region to do so. I'm saying that the U.S. is acknowledging on some level that it can't fight all of these wars just by virtue of this kind of diversion or this diversification of responsibilities to its proxies. And so it doesn't seem to have the capability of saying we can supply weapons to every theater at once and we can be in every theater at once. So it seems like he has to choose. I guess that's my point. Like, it doesn't seem, based on what the United States has been doing with its proxies, that it has the capability of dealing with all theaters at one time, at least not now.
I think that's right. And actually, when we talk about Asian pivot, it can have different meanings. It can have meaning in terms of deterrence and containment of China. It can also mean embracing economic opportunities from China. It can mean both things, right? And I think actually you mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but that was set up to exclude China, in fact. So actually, if the US, economically, China and the US are direct competitors, although the economic models are very, very different. China has an exporting sort of economic model. The US has an investment-led sort of economic model. I know Trump wants to kind of shift that. He wants to kind of appeal to his blue-collar base. He wants to kind of export more US goods. That requires some significant shifts in the structure of the US economy, which will bring it up into greater kind of conflict with China. So, I think that trade and economic thing is a big part of the deal with the kind of the Asia pivot and making that work under Trump. It's not really clear that he's got a clear plan for how to do that sort of right now. But on your point about, yes, can US fight in Europe and China? Clearly it can't. But why would it want to anyway? The US isn't fighting in Ukraine now, and it never has been. And actually, Europeans are paying America for Ukraine to fight America's war, or at least Joe Biden's war. So if the US provides some AWACS planes for this apparent reassurance force, if it ever happens, it's not going to be a massive military investment on their part. It wouldn't diminish their capabilities, I don't think, in the Asia Pacific region. The US has by far the biggest and most powerful military in the whole world, and actually Trump's just given them a big pay rise as well. So I don't completely buy into that, but in any case, the US aren't invested in Ukraine now anyway, and never have been, apart from supplying weapons that other people are paying for.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just saying the U.S. policy at this point seems to be diversification of labor. And the U.S. wouldn't need to do that if it could be everywhere at once. You can have a huge military, and that military could get chewed up depending upon the war zone that you enable or put that military in. The U.S. in every war game has lost to China because, again, the U.S. is trying to attack, whereas China is effectively trying to defend.
And I guess Vietnam.
Yes, and Vietnam, North Korea. When this Korean War, that's another thing, right? You have these very poor fighters that are taking on this kind of U.S. military. I guess my thing is, if he indeed is trying to walk, and if he, in his heart of hearts, want to end the conflict, but he's not really doing anything in real terms to end the conflict, then how is he trying to end the conflict? Meaning, I know what Trump is saying. I get it, right? Oh, I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. You should nominate me. And he's getting other countries to say, this man is a man of peace. He's a great man.
He's the daddy.
Right. But the reality seems very different. The reality seems that whatever Trump, quote unquote, wants, that American president can't accept capitulation, which is what Russia would accept. When they're given the document saying, this is what we need to end the war, that's effectively a surrender and capitulation document for all intents and purposes. Or do you agree with that? Do you think there was some kind of leeway that Russia could give while remaining true to the spirit of what they wanted in the context of the war? I think 2014 started it. The overthrow of Ukraine, but just in the context of them invading Ukraine and what they wanted. From my point of view, they were chasing safety. Can they get that kind of deal?
Well, they were prepared to accept a deal in April of 2022 in Istanbul, which should have largely been on the same terms as that which is on the table now to Ukraine in terms of military neutrality, non-membership of NATO,
right,
and that sort of thing, and just accepting the line of control as it was frozen in place at the end of the hostilities and negotiating that over the longer term. That's a worse version of that is what's on the table now. But is it a capitulation? No. I mean, what's the alternative? If that's a capitulation, what is the alternative? The alternative is a much more catastrophic defeat. So when people talk about capitulation, what they're really saying is, well, we're too invested in fighting to stop. It's not really a capitulation. It's actually settling on terms which don't worsen their situation in the future. That's not a capitulation. That's just statesmanship.
No, that's a good point. I guess the reason I call it a capitulation is because from the European and from the American side, there is a view of the world that seems to inhibit any capability of coming to any kind of terms or deal. Like, for example, I'm always curious about how Europe views its relationship with the US. From our perspective, Europe is not an equal. From our perspective. And so, like, I'm saying this poorly. When all of those European leaders came to the US, Donald Trump is being honest in the way that he sees them. It's that distinction. It's not, we're on the same side, we're buddies, we're friends, we're allies, et cetera, et cetera. Like, if you go to Russia and China consider themselves equals. And in India, they consider themselves equals. The BRICS thing, one of their main things is this is not about a hegemon. This is about equals working with one another in our kind of real politics. The US doesn't see the world in those terms. It's us and it's everybody else. And in the same way that Ukraine is being fed to Russia now, with all of these people getting killed in this catastrophe, the US is willing to do that to Europe, which is evidenced by what Donald Trump was effectively saying. Hey, if you put all those troops out there, we'll back you on it. We may not get involved, but we'll back you on it. Does Europe get that? I mean, do they know that? Really?
I think we tend to believe that if we just flattered Trump and we gruntled Trump along, that we can sort of buy ourselves a bit more time in this process. But I've always been very clear-eyed about our relationship with the United States of America. I mean, I love the US. I've been many times, DC, and including shortly before 9/11. In fact, I was in the Pentagon in Langley and other places around that time. A lot of time for the US, but it is a foreign country. When I visit the US, I love it, but it's a different country. Like if I travel to France, that's a different. I mean, US people may speak the same language as us, but it's a foreign country. We tend to think of it as the same as us. Our bigger sort of brother or daddy, maybe, who knows, whatever. But it's a totally different country with different national interests. Different drivers of its foreign policy, and we forget that at our peril, and we forget that sadly all of the time. But that is absolutely true. And since Trump has come to power, I mean, Vance, even before the elections, that Vance, I think, speaks a lot of sense, I have to say. I mean, I don't frankly care. I mean, I basically think the Democrats are essentially anti-British, but I don't really care who you vote as your leadership. But I think the kind of what the Trump team was saying actually resonated with me more than frankly anything that the sort of crazy sort of Biden team were frankly saying about the war, because they don't care. I mean, it's not their war. They're not fighting it. They're not going to send troops to it. They've never been prepared to send American troops. I mean, it's kind of they just had this kind of values-driven agenda to somehow peel these states off, make them more like us, make them mini-me versions of sort of US democratic an economic system, and it was totally misguided. And actually, it's not the Americans paying the price for that; it's us paying the price for that. And we can't see that the Americans have sold us a down the river with this. And like I say, no disrespect to the USA, love it as a country, been many times.
No, you're just being true. That's just true. I have to be honest with you. I've been mystified on some level by it, which is why I end up with this kind of cynical thing of, okay, well, they want to drag Europe into some kind of war. It's and the reason I said mystified, like if you think of cut off gas, the US turns around and say, hey, we'll sell you LNG for 5 times the price you're paying before. They still get Russian gas, but they have to buy it through a third party at a markup. The weapons that they're buying are coming from the US, which are expensive. All of this money is just leaving Europe and coming into US coffers. And Europe doesn't seem to grasp you're being fleeced. Yeah, it's an economic thing on some level. Yeah, they want to go after Russia, but also they look at it as we can try to colonize Europe in the process of doing so. And those leaders are just, they're just going straight in. Do they believe in their heart of hearts, ultimately, though, that kind of like Israel, if we get into a fight, like every other world war, the U.S. will be dragged in. So even if we don't have the manpower to do it, we can pull the U.S. into a conflict.
I believe many people do. I believe, and in fact, they talk about it all the time. Some sort of U.S. backstop, and that's why you mentioned it earlier. Trump's decision on strategic enablers and that sort of thing was important. We need that. We don't feel we can stand on our own feet, and it's ridiculous because actually Russia economically is, population-wise, is much smaller than Europe. Why can't we have a normal sort of relationship with that country? It's quite ridiculous. But that's sadly, that's that delusion, sadly, that kind of fuels our thinking that daddy is going to come and help us if we fight the little kid, and it turns out he's tougher than we are. So I'm afraid to say, but that is the truth of it.
Last question: why do you think this level of ire is between Europe and Russia? I mean, you were there. You were working as a British diplomat. As you said, part of your job was sanctions. But like at some kind of deeper level, Russia's not a communist country anymore. So it's not like you're dealing with the Soviet Union or an ideological actor. You're dealing with a realist country.
Yeah.
Why the division? Is it just they have resources that we can get our hands on, so we need to undermine and destroy it? Is it historical context? What is the thing that is... You wrote the book on this, which is why I'm asking this as the last question.
I'll tell you one thing, Jamal. The whole time I was in Moscow, it was clear that the Russians wanted to have a closer relationship, with Europe, with the UK, as well. They wanted to have stronger economic, social, and cultural ties. What they didn't want is for us to kind of force our values. I don't actually believe there's this codified set of European values, but I mean, they didn't want European values imposed on them. They wanted everything else, opening up, having really good trading relations, having really good relations between people, cultural stuff, and all that. They were all in for that. They wanted that, but we didn't. And I think we kind of haven't really got past the downfall of the Soviet Union. This feeling that Russia was just a diminished version of its former kind of Soviet self, and we've tried to kind of diminish it even further, and we failed. And I think the reason why we, not me, but why many people hate that fact so much is because they failed. And actually, the only way out is to accept and admit to their populations that they fed all of this kind of propaganda to, that they have failed, and that will, politicians or humans, after all, have a cost to them in terms of their careers. And I think it's politics comes down to kind of simple sort of drivers of human nature. Politicians want to stay in office. They like power, and I think it's down to that. Coming out of the war in Ukraine means accepting failure, and that will have devastating political consequences for the mainstream elites within Europe. And I think it's as simple as that.
Interesting. See, I'm fascinated by this conversation, and I love it. By the way, thank you for it.
Let's do it again.
Yes. And so I'm going to let you go. I'm just going to say this last part. Many people come from this from a different angle. You've been behind the machinery, so you kind of see how these people act and why they act the way that they do. We're looking at it from above. Like, it's like you're looking at a plane trying to describe the plane, and you can only see it from above. So it's an interesting conversation. Thank you for this, man. I really do appreciate it. I'm Ian Proud. Check him out.
It was lovely talking to you. Let's do this again soon.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
And you, mate. Bye for now.
Alrighty. Bye-bye. All right. He is